What lies at the heart of homophobia?
Hate. I don't know. They just hate us. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I do not know why. I suspect that most hate people who hate us are terrified that they have homosexuality inside themselves, and that's their way of fighting against it.
In my family, there was never anything negative said about gay people. I don't remember having specific discussions about them, and or being instructed about them. I'm not sure how much my parents knew, but by the time I was in college and then into theater, I certainly had met a lot of gay people and worked with them. So I probably knew more than they did.
I don't think my parents even mentioned it or had any friends who were gay, or it was just a blank.
I think that I'd have to say it was pretty positive. As far as I remember, the first time that we talked about it was when I was probably 8 to 10, and my mom had a colleague at school who was a good friend of hers, and he was gay. And I remember meeting him and then later his partner. And we used to actually go see his partner play piano for a famous Dallas men's orchestra and choir at least a couple times a year. And so from, like I said, about the age of 10, I was regularly a part of an artistic community which was openly gay and supported gay rights in Texas.
I don't really remember being taught anything about gays and lesbians from my parents. It was only after I revealed my relationship to Amy that their views became known to me, although I might have predicted their reactions simply based on their personalities. My mother's response was one of not being able to reconcile the fact that I was somehow different from whom she knew me to be. The disappointment that I was beyond her comprehension was too much to bear. She needed to know whether I was gay or straight. Well, I felt that the question itself was misguided and had nothing to do with me in particular. My father, on the other hand, was as chill about the whole matter as you can imagine. As long as I was happy, he was happy. As long as I felt loved, he was satisfied. He was always open and accepting and didn't need to peg me as one thing or another. I was simply Abby, and that is who I still am today.
I don't think I was taught anything about gay people. It wasn't anything you really talked about. It was not in the public domain when I grew up in the, high school in the 30s and early 40s and college in the 40s. It really wasn't much. I don't remember any discussion at all with my parents.
So when I would bring home, I'd bring home a lot of people, so we would fill all of the rooms, and I'd have Brooks McKay, who was black and very elegant. Tom knew him. In fact, I had wanted to use him in my production of Medal of Honor Rag, my senior show. But actually my friend Roscoe Gilliam was also there, who did do Medal of Honor Rag. And Roscoe was about as gay as they came. He went on to do chorus line for many years and did this song, give me the ball, give me the ball, give me the ball.
John had gay friends in the Army, and maybe he brought them home. I don't know. I wasn't there.
But maybe they weren't as out.
No, one of them was very out.
Really?
But I wasn't,
yeah, you weren't.
But I wasn't around at that time. I wasn't, it's before I was born, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we never discussed it. Grandma just loved these guys, and they loved her. What wasn't to love? They adored her. And my mother, of course, was always open-minded. But so I don't remember ever being told anything, one way or the other. But I always knew gay people were there. I just did. I knew.
Did you know this in grammar school and high school? Mm-hmm. High school too?
Oh yeah. Oh, high school, yeah. But high school, I was at the Cambridge school. Things were different.
Certainly, I don't remember any mentioning or thought of it. But we were just saying before you came in that they have to have been there. They didn't just suddenly emerge.
I think it was kind of more, maybe when in high school, people sort of giggled about it. I think he's a little strange or something like that. That's as far as it ever went. There was never public acknowledgement about it. Just sort of a funny discussion, but there was no integration of anything, no discussion of it much. And of course I grew up in high school and college during the war, World War II, and there were other things that were more immediate and more important, and there wasn't much discussion. And I went to a girls' college, there was very little discussion about it. I don't remember any discussion about it at all.
I suppose I was always, once I went away to college, but even in college, I wasn't particularly aware of it, or I just don't remember anymore.
I suppose I must have heard things from other people, but I can't remember. I just have always felt that people are people, individuals, and that all people matter.
You know, when I was in high school, I don't think anybody knew anything about gay people. Yeah, we're talking the 60s. So by the time I graduated, it was when the Vietnam protests were heating up and the hippie movement was getting into full swing. And so there was a general attitude of, hey, you know, whatever you do is cool. So by the time gay people started to assert themselves socially, I was already working with them, and I had friends, and some I didn't like, just like everybody else, you know. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of timing. If I had grown up 20 years later, it would have been different because there was much more socially being and publicly being spoken about and by gays. So there probably would have been much more understanding and confrontation with people who don't like gays, most of whom probably never met a gay person.
I don't remember a moment where I learned that there was a thing called being gay. It was just always there. And it's certainly at Indian Hill, the arts camp I went to. I had a great friend named Jay Bernfeld, who called himself Il Barone di Bernfeldo. Yeah. And he wore a cape.
Yes, of course.
He was fat. He was one of my best friends.
I certainly, over the years, became close friends with gay people, but that's when I was a grown-up and far away from living in Coney Island, New York. For a long time I did documentary films, and again, none of the people on my crew, which was small, were gay. But once I started doing theatrical films, then costume designers, actors, this, that, it just became a normal thing.
So when was kind of the first time you met someone who was gay?
Probably the first time I did a show, and I got my equity card during summer stock in Hyannis, Massachusetts, and the dancers were all, it was sort of taken for granted. The dancers were a little bit flightier, a little different from everybody. There was no real discussion about, except that the dancers were considered, they were okay to go around with because they weren't any threat.
You know, I hate to be difficult, but just like any other preconceptions you might have of certain types of people, they inevitably change once you get to know somebody. I think my first friends who, again, identified as gay or lesbian, I probably didn't meet until sometime in university. And if I had a lot of preconceived notions about what lesbians were like or what gay men were like, you know, hopefully my opinions became more complex. I have quite a few friends now who identify as being part of the LGBTQ community, and they teach me new things every day, but I don't know if that's because they're just really awesome people or if they are in fact deconstructing categories that I had in mind.
I'm in theater. They're very involved. I've had wonderful friends over the years. I'm constantly around gay people in the theater. Some of them are flamboyant, some aren't, just like other kinds of people. But no, I've enjoyed working with them. And I found that especially gay men generally tend to have a great sense of humor and can be, they tease extremely well. And they're fun. They're fun to be around.
Well, I've told you how I grew up always being aware that there were people who were gay because of my mother being in the performing arts. And I can remember as young as, I think 4, when we went to the Lake George Opera Festival for the summer, and I played the Mikado's umbrella carrier. I knew that I kind of had a sense of who was gay in the show because of how, I don't know, I trusted to them, I responded to them. The guy who played Mikado was slightly more motherly to me, was my perception. But I hadn't really met transsexual or transgendered or transvestites until college, when I met Wayne, whose last name shall be withheld, in the drama department, and we decided to become roommates. He was a vivacious, wonderful, just delightful sprite of a guy. I was just barely 18, and he must have been about the same age. So we found an apartment, and we had a third roommate, who I don't even remember. But Wayne asked at one point if it would be all right if his sister Wendy would come and stay occasionally because she worked downtown at night. She did a night shift. I said, fine. So the first night Wendy came, I realized Wendy wasn't his sister. Wendy was his brother, who was a drag queen. And furthermore, Wayne was a drag queen. And furthermore, Wendy brought all of her friends. And so they would come in late after the clubs closed. They worked down on Hotel Street, which was sort of the notorious, not red light district. Well, yeah, I guess it was. Red light and yellow light and green lights and rainbow lights district of Honolulu. And they'd come in very late at night, and oh my God, were they loud. They were loud. And I loved it. I mean, at first it was like, wow, I'm meeting all these cool new people. After a month, I really had to get some sleep.
I had another friendship in high school that is worth mentioning. Someone who I didn't actually go to school with, but was best friends with in a way that I could only describe as intoxicating. Very long story short, after years of spending all of our time together, we had a major falling out and didn't speak for years. Why? Well, that was never entirely clear to me. Certainly there was the fact that we had a mutual friend who was jealous of our friendship and actively drove a wedge between us. Also was the fact that we each had boyfriends who were leading us in different directions. Drugs played a role as well, with her becoming involved in some more serious drug use and me shying away. Well, years after our falling out, she appeared in my room one day while we were both home from college, and at that moment I remember her saying that she felt like we had gone through a divorce. But we were so intensely uncomfortable with each other that the day came and went and was very painful, restrained in the way that you witness in movies when you wish the characters would just speak their minds and all would be healed. But of course we didn't. And then again, years later, we bumped into each other on the street in New York City and wound up going to dinner with each other. And it was only at this point, probably 8 years after the initial falling out, that we came to realize, or openly wonder, whether we had been in love with each other and were too young to articulate the emotions at the time. Nearly 20 years have passed since then, and I just saw her for lunch not long ago. We are virtually strangers now, and yet still oddly tender.
I had gay, because I would bring home my gay friends from Carnegie Mellon who loved to go through Grandma's old clothes in the attic on Overlook Avenue. And in fact, my friend Dan Wallace took a whole bunch of her old suits and things back to school for the costume shop. And they were openly gay. Danny Wallace, a wonderful actor named Brooks, I don't remember his last name, I think it was Brooks McKay. And Grandma would say, "Don't tell Betty where they slept." She didn't want Betty to know which sheets. And this
Betty
is
was
way before. Yeah, Betty was were they Czechoslovakian, I think?
Yeah.
This is way before AIDS.
What happened was the beginning of the real AIDS epidemic in the 70s. There was no cure for it yet, but people were beginning to get sick and die. And that's when it came to public consciousness, I think. It was more the AIDS epidemic, and HIV was a hated When everybody said HIV, you got petrified. And it was more the fear of that brought it out into the open than anything else.
Did you know people who were affected by AIDS?
Yes.
Do you have any?
Yes, a lot. And again, since there was really no cure for it at the time, a lot of people died. When I first moved to New York and started working theater, I also took up bridge, which was I had not played before, and we had a bridge club down in the village, and we had a lot of prominent actors like Debbie Monk and a lot of well-known actors. I think the guys who played bridge with, they were all in show business. They were mostly, well, some of them were musicians, some dancers, some musicians. When I look back at it now, I think we had 12 people who played regularly in the village. The men have all died. There's not one of them left. There were maybe 5 or 6 guys we played with all the time. One was a Broadway conductor, a couple of them were actors, a couple were dancers. And they were all affected by AIDS. They all got AIDS, they all died.
I had one beloved friend who was a costume designer for a number of films I did. And this was early on, it must have been in the mid-90s, early enough, that he was just reckless. He would not go to a doctor. And he finally did go, but then didn't take the medication. And it was just too late. He was part of that earlier wave of people who did not get the drugs he needed, and then he called me one day. He lived in New York, and I didn't see him all that often when we weren't working, and he said that he wanted to say goodbye to me because he had saved enough drugs that he was going to commit suicide. And he did. He just didn't want to live anymore.
Yeah, when I was in New York and on Broadway, that was 1992, 91 to 92. And I've been in New York for years before that, and of course the mid to late 80s was when AIDS was really becoming an epidemic. And in fact, Nina, my wife, and I worked, when we met, we worked with a man named Rex Rabel, who was a wonderful, wonderful man, and gay, and he died of AIDS very soon after we had worked with him. And nobody knew what it was at that time. He was one of many. But it was pretty scary in the gay community at that time, and then it was realized that it was being shared by addicts with needles and things like that, so an unprotected sex. And it changed, over those years, it changed the lifestyles of a lot of gay men in New York and beyond, of course, as more and more information came out and as more and more people died. So it was scary, and we were afraid for a lot of our friends, and I actually myself knew only a few who ended up dying, which was more than enough. So it just became, and it's part of, I think, it's part of what brought gay people out of the closet into society more, is they had to stand up and say, wait a minute, how are we going to deal with this? And it's not just us, and it's not a gay disease. They were being attacked. So it accelerated, I think, all of that coming out of gays and into society more. And I think it made them more aggressive in terms of demanding their rights and fighting for their rights, which has continued through the 90s into the last 20, 25 years.
Obviously, when I got to college, it was just the beginning of people coming out, really being out. And that was very cool. And I think I told you about my friend Michael and cuddling with him and feeling so comfortable, and at one point sort of flirting a little bit more, I was being a little suggestive, and he said, "Oh, don't you know, I'm gay." And then just suddenly there were gay men all around me. It was the theater department, and it was wonderful, and everybody was out. And it was only years later, because this was the 70s. And a lot of them died later of AIDS. No one knew what it was at that time. I didn't know anyone with AIDS until I was working in theater in Seattle, and the actor that Dad and I worked with, Rex, who our prop is named after in our living room, our statue is named after in our living room. Rex was the first person I knew who died of AIDS, but he said he didn't even know what it was. It was cancer.
I wish ACT UP still were here, and that everybody belonged to an ACT UP chapter, just like so many people go to church every week. That was our church, somehow, our religion.
Yeah, my father was a minister, a Lutheran minister, and there's two segments of the Lutheran Church. One is more conservative than the other. My father was in the one that was not so conservative, and he generally held very progressive views, certainly social progressive views.
I think living in Texas, the chances are pretty good that I was exposed to differing opinions. My parents did a really good job of making me feel as though I could express my own opinions and that I could learn openly about different types of people. So my overall impression is that I thought that people who identified as gay or lesbian were people just like me. I didn't see the difference, I don't think.
Each member of my family had different reactions. My other aunt was extremely warm and accepting of Amy, far less so of her own daughter's female partner a few years later. I think it is difficult for parents to accept that perhaps their children are not who, or are more than who, they think they are. My father, as I described, was fantastic. It was a complete non-issue in the same way it was for me. My brother had a very hard time, and it took him quite a while to accept Amy. Interestingly, it was only after we started to live together that he came to look beneath the stereotypes and come to know her, and therefore like her.
Because I know you sang out of the U.S. too, right? Was it talked about differently in other parts of the world?
Yes. In the Latin countries, certainly Mexico, South America, you didn't talk about it. You just didn't talk about it. They were frequently blackballed, especially Italy. I mean, the macho countries like Mexico and Italy and South America, you didn't talk about it. Some of them were blackballed by opera companies. They were afraid of them. They were afraid of AIDS, I think, and whatnot. Certainly in the 70s and 60s they were. So it was much more taboo than it was here. It's much more talked about it in America than any place else.
The media is your friend. It can be your friend, you know. I always said to everyone, become friends with reporters. When you become friends with them, if they don't know anything, teach them. You know, constantly you'd get a reporter on the other end of the phone who didn't know dipshit.
I thought of myself as fairly, just completely comfortable with, my gay friends, or it just meant nothing. And a friend of mine suggested that I try to do a documentary about a place in New York that's a residence for gay, transgender boys at that time who had been in foster care, abused in foster care, first of all, kicked out of their families, then got into foster care where they were not very well treated by and large, and that we should go to this residence. And I said, what would I have to do with it? She said, well, let's just go and visit. So when we got there, we had to wait in their main parlor for the director to come down to talk to us. And it was very, sort of low-level lighting. And Susan and I were talking. I was with my friend. And there were these 3 or 4 beautiful girls sitting there. In fact, a beautiful girl conducted us to where we would sit. And it only occurred to us later on that all of them were transgender. They thought of themselves as female. And when we left the building later on, I burst into almost hysterical laughter. And I realized, I was shocked that I hadn't realized. That shocked me. I wasn't used to that. I hadn't known any transgender people. And then I thought, well, we've got to do this film, because if I think of myself as totally at ease with this, then how would other people feel? I mean, there's so much prejudice against this. So once I started doing the film, and I was there on and off for a year, I got so used to it that one of our main characters, Jasmine, was born as male, but I within just days, I was amazed. To me, Jasmine was she. I mean, to me, that's the shock, is how easy it was once you got to be part of it. So I would hope that that would hold true for everybody.
As I've said, I have got quite a number of friends now that place themselves in the LGBTQ community. And probably more now that I'm in my PhD and 30 than I have had previously, and maybe that's a coincidence. In terms of activity, I definitely have always been a supporter of the LGBTQ community. I'd like to consider myself an ally. I try to be as vocal as I can about things like equal rights to marriage, about the rights that civil partnerships should garner, and certainly human rights. But currently, I am the managing editor and PR for a quarterly publication called Geeked Magazine, and we situate ourselves firmly in the LGBTQ and straight ally community. In both issues that we've put out so far this year, we've had articles which are either written from the perspective of someone who identifies as gay or in support of various movements that are, like I said, fighting for social rights. And we try really hard to make Geeked an open, inclusive community. Not everybody has to be gay, not everybody has to be straight, but we're interested in everybody being an ally for LGBTQ. So, like I said, we're not all the same, but we do believe that it's important to have a shared value system, and that supports LGBTQ in our community in London.
I'll tell you a story now about this documentary I was just describing called Gramercy Stories, because the building's near Gramercy Place in New York. We funded the film by raising money from foundations and friends. You know, some gave $1,000, some gave $50. And I have neighbors who are two guys who are married, who live very close to where this building is. And they couldn't stand these kids. They would walk by the building. Some of the kids would hang around outside, and when we asked them to donate, they said absolutely not. You know, they're a disgrace to the neighborhood. And then later on, when they saw the film, they were very touched by the individuals. But I wonder if a lot of it has to do with class. That the kids who are in this particular place, I mean, where I live is in a place, there are a lot of rich people, and there are quite a number of married, mostly men, male couples, and they don't want to have anything to do with these. You'd think that they'd be the ones supporting, you know, half the homeless kids in New York, runaways, are gay, you know, and so it's something I've been thinking about, not gone very far, and I'm sure a lot of people have written about it, but how it intersects class and gender and race.
And actually that play was the one I told you was about sexual mores in England, didn't I? It was a wonderful play called Cloud 9. And the first act explored roles in the colonial era. So you had the very proper father, the colonialist, who was secretly lusting after the independent woman who lived nearby, except that she was a lesbian, lusting after the wife of this family. The wife of the family was played by a man. Their friend was a big game hunter, very masculine. That's what your father played. He was lusting after the little boy, who I played. In the second act, we then reversed parts. So now the roles, in other words, they didn't have to disguise themselves as they did in colonial times, disguise their sexuality, hide their sexuality. So in the second act, we all played roles that were who we were. I played a woman. Dad played my husband. The lesbian who, from the first act, who was lusted after by the father, was now very open and trying to have an affair with my character, the one who was married to your dad. And the little boy who I had played in the first act had grown up to be a gay man in the second act. So it was sexual roles, relationships, how they intertwined, how people identified with each other given their particular sexual roles, only at totally different times. After the free love expression, and then in colonial England.
As a dancer, when you touch a person, you notice that each body is unique. No one person is alike. This is how I view people. I love individuals, not their gender.
Right now, I spend so much time worrying about this damn book, my 4,000-page novel.
Which, does it have a working title?
It's the title, The American People.
The American
It's
People.
a history of America, in America, of homosexuality. We have been here since day one. That, I guess, is my greatest interest right now, was somehow getting our history out there.
I just think that this class you're in is absolutely ace, and I am so jealous that I didn't have this kind of opportunity in high school. But I think your instructors should be incredibly proud, and they should be commended. And I feel really excited for you. If this is the kind of education that you're getting now, there will be nothing to stop you.